This is Camille with Hazel Soapery, www.hazelsoapery.com. This is a soapy tutorial section of our course. So you are taking one of our soap making courses, and I am going to now teach you how to calculate your recipe using Soapy. Soap calculators are a very important part of the soap making process. There are several out there, but for the purposes of this course and the way that we calculate our superfat, we are going to use Soapy. It is very friendly for that and easy to use. Likewise, there are written instructions in the written portion of the course if you need to use them to follow along or to refer back to notes. So let's begin. Okay, so we're going to go to calculator. We logged in, create yourself an account. Make sure it's something that you'll remember so that you can save all of your recipes. I have already done this, so let's go back. What we are going to do is we're going to create a recipe. And with this recipe, we're making a solid soap. So we're going to leave box 1 as it is because you can do liquid or soap calculations on Soapy. We are using sodium hydroxide, making a bar soap. So we are going to stick with solid soap. Over here, you can choose your percent, how you want to weigh your soap. Um, I highly recommend that you always start your recipe with percentages so that you know you have your weights right. And then measure in grams. The reason that we measure in grams is because when we're using sodium hydroxide and because it's caustic and we don't want a lye heavy soap, we want to get as most precise measurements as possible. So we're going to use grams. This is 500 grams. That'll be your oil weight, right? So you've got about a pound of oils, a little more. And then once you add your water, your batch will be a lot larger. So we're going to start with 500 grams. This is scalable. So as you become more comfortable, you can up the amount of grams of oil so that you can prepare larger batches of soap at one time. People have a tendency to want to just multiply that out. You can do that. However, I strongly recommend that whenever you change anything in your recipe, be it the size, an oil, or anything, you always come back to your soap calculator and you run those numbers again. We don't want to play with the numbers when it comes to making sure that the soap is completely saponified. All right, so in box 2, again, we're going to leave it on percentages, and then we're going to leave that on grams. Perfect. Box 3, for this course, because it is a beginner's course, we're going to go with all the recommendations. We're not going to play with the water amounts, the lye concentration, or any of that. We're going to leave everything there the same. Um, Water discounts and those kind of things are a more advanced level soaping. So as you grow and become more comfortable with the actual process and the phases, you are free to be as creative with these as you want to. Just make sure you do the research so that you end up with the right balance of everything. So we're going to run this recipe twice. And each time, the majority of this work is going to be done right here in box 4, oil superfat. For the first run, we are going to put 2%. We are not going to check superfat after cook. This is so that we can create our base recipe. So everything that's going to go in the pot. We want to do that at a 2%. At 0%, one, you have to be very precise. And two, I don't really like the way a bar of soap comes out with a 0% super fat as I'm cooking it. I prefer to have some extra oil, some extra fat in there, and 2% is a good level. We're going to do a total super fat of 7%. But for in the cook, we're only going to put 2%. So we're going to leave that there. We are not going to check super fat after the cook. We'll do that in the next recipe. So then we're going to scroll down a bit. Fragrance, again, we're going to leave it at 3% of oil weight. I recommend that you also look at Brambleberry. They have a lot of fragrance calculators, and one that even will tell you I scent lighter, so I don't use 3%. I may use 1.5%. And if I were going to run that through this calculator, I would change it here. But it also will be more specific as to a type of essential oil. Your weight for essential oils is not going to be 3%. But even with that, at say 1.5%, right? I can do that with lavender. I cannot do 1.5% with cinnamon. So it's always good to use the other calculators that are going to give you the specific weights for especially like things like essential oils, or if you want to scent heavier or milder, run it through those calculators, and brambleberry.com has a great one. Additives. This is where I'm going to add, if I want to add something like activated charcoal. For the sake of having it on my recipe, I'm going to add that there, right? And it starts with 1 teaspoon, which is great. So I would do probably about a teaspoon per pound of oil, right? So if I have 1 pound of oil, 1 teaspoon of activated charcoal, 2 pounds of oil, or 1,000 grams, more or less, because it's like 473 or something like that, point something. And you can be a little, that's okay if you go a little bit over, but the rule of thumb is typically for your additives per pound of oil, 1 teaspoon. Okay. Adjust live for citric acid. We are not adding citric acid. I do not add citric acid, so we're going to go right past that. And then we're going to head to select our oils. The recipe that I've given you is going to be very basic. If you have a recipe for cold processed soap, feel free to use that. It should work just fine. But again, run it through the soap calculator. But we're going to do a very basic 4 oil recipe as a beginner. And most of the ingredients you can find at local stores. That's why I chose it. It's a good recipe to learn the process. And then as you graduate through understanding all the phases and those things, you can start using those more expensive oils and butters and all of those kind of things. But it's an expensive craft to learn. So I'm trying to find you a recipe that's going to be economical and get the job done. That's going to be a nice bar of soap. Okay. So we're going to start with castor oil. There it is. We're going to add it. We're going to go to coconut oil. 76 degrees is typically, that's your melting point, but that's typically what you're going to get when you get coconut oil from your stores, unless it says 92 or fractionated. I recommend starting with 76. We're going to add Crisco, the blue can. So old is how it is in there. That's the blue can Crisco. For this part, you can substitute palm oil if you have it. You can substitute um, what else can you use? You can use palm oil, not palm kernel oil. That's completely different. So, or lard, tallow. Those are going to be, if you want, if you have those on hand, you can substitute the Crisco out for those. And if you want one of those recipes, let me know and I can get that to you as well. And then we're going to add olive oil. And we're just going to use regular olive oil, not pumice. Okay, so now we have our recipe oils in here. We're going to go over to our percentages. 5% castor oil. This is going to really help support the bubbles and give you a nice bar. You're going to use 25% coconut oil. You don't want to be too heavy on the coconut oil because it can be drying. Your Crisco is going to help your bar nice and hard with some great lather at 35%, and the same with olive oil, 35%. Whenever you're calculating a soap recipe, and most of them are have a default setting that's not going to let you really proceed any further unless you have 100%. So you always want to be sure that when you end your recipe, you are at 100%. And then you can play with numbers as, again, you want to modify your recipe or just create a completely different recipe. Here's a good place to learn how to do that. Soap Calc, and it's SOAPCALC, is another calculator. That's the one that I typically use to formulate recipes. It's just older and has a lot of information already in it, but Soapy allows for manipulating the recipe that I want to do. So now that we've put everything in, right, we've got our oil at 100%. It's going to give us the measurements in grams. So that would be 25 grams of castor oil. It would be 125 grams of coconut oil, 175 grams of the blue can Crisco. No, blue can, as well as 175 grams of olive oil. It's going to tell us that we're going to use 1 teaspoon of activated charcoal. And then down here is going to give us our recipe totals. So your total water weight, this is going to be the water that you're going to use to make your lye solution, okay? It's going to be 190 grams. Your total sodium hydroxide weight, 72.3 grams. And I want to point out here, I'm going to put a pin in this. The rule of thumb for measuring ingredients when making soap is this. If your scale, you should have a digital scale. If your digital scale does not go beyond the decimal point to give you 0.3, right? If you're measuring your oils, you can go up to 73. It's just going to give you extra oils, extra superfat. That's fine. If you're measuring your water, you could go up to 73. It's okay. You see these numbers, there's a great difference between your total water weight and your sodium hydroxide weight. That it's perfectly fine. What is not fine is for you to measure up on your sodium hydroxide. You never measure up on your lye. You can either get a scale that has passed the decimal point or stop at 72. Don't try and guess. Don't try and wiggle, finagle, or anything like that. Or if you have a jewelry scale, you can always measure out 72 on the regular scale and zero point 0.3 grams on the jewelry scale. But what you cannot do is then say, oh, I'll just go ahead and bump it up to 73. Do not do that. Okay, so your total oil weight is going to be 500 grams. Your fragrance oil weight will be 15 grams. Your total batch weight, this is what you're going to put in the mold right here, is going to be approximately 773.3 grams. I say approximately because we're doing hot process soap making, and there's a possibility that you can lose a little bit of that weight throughout the cooking process because so much of it is water. Because we have that external heating element, some of it will evaporate, which is why it's really important to keep your lid on as much as you possibly can. Note here where it says super fat, it just says 2%. It'll be different on the next recipe. It says 2%. What it's already done is it's calculated through to say whatever is in the pot, you will have a 2% super fat at the end. It is not always what you will think it will be. You'll learn the SAP values that'll say, okay, after saponification, there's a possibility that I may have this much shea butter left over. I may have this much whatever left over. All this is telling you is that it's going to be 2% of whatever that mix is. Okay, and then it goes through your lye concentration, your water ratio, your saturated and unsaturated fats. All right, then we're going to go over to your recipe properties. Notice it gives you an excellent recommended range, right? I like to try and stay in between the middle of all of these numbers somewhere, okay? Depending on the bar. So this is going to basically tell you what is my bar ideally going to look like. So your bubbly is good, and you can always check here where there's a question mark. It's going to tell you how much loose, fluffy lather is produced. A bubbly lather is produced quickly by a soap but doesn't last long. Okay, so Our bubbly number, excuse me, our bubbly number is good. Our cleansing number is great. Cleansing, you want to be really careful with. You don't want a bar that's too cleansing. Um, your straight coconut oil bars, right? They're going to be super cleansing and drying. So those are kind of things that you'll learn as you research the ingredients that you're using in your soap bars. But 17 is a great number. 61, this bar is going to be super conditioning. Okay? So it's going to soften and soothe your skin. It's going to be anti tight and dry. So that's a great number. Your hardness, same thing. You want to try and do that. We're going to also add salt to help with that. Or you can use sodium lactate to help with that as well. And we're also going, and something like sodium lactate would be another additive that you would add at a teaspoon per pound. Salt, sugar, same thing. Sugar helps with your bubbles. All right. And then you have your longevity and how stable your bar is. Over here, you're going to have your fatty acids, and it gives you a great definition of what those are. But for the purposes of this class, we're going to focus on these numbers here, and they're good. So we're going to move forward. Always save your recipe. We're going to call this Hot Process Soapmaking. Okay, and we'll say super fat and cook. I spelled that wrong. Let's go back. Super fat and cook. And we'll call this part one. Okay? You can call your recipes whatever you would like to call them. That's absolutely fine. We're going to make a note with this section. You want to be very clear because as you make more soap, you'll forget little details. This is the recipe we will use as it has super fat in the cook. And we'll be even more specific and has 2% super 2 2%. There we go. Super fat in the cook. Okay, so we definitely want to make sure that this is the recipe that we get our totals from, our measurements from when we go to create this batch of soap. And then we'll make a note down here. The after cook super fat amount is, right? When we get it, we'll come back and we will add it. All right, so then we're going to go to the bottom. Any other details? I want to use whatever kind of additives, ingredients, whatever other things you want to add. Like I said, let's see. This recipe will have a yogurt slurry added after the cook. These are the kind of ingredients that you will want to add. And you can say, I do tablespoons here. 1 tablespoon of yogurt per pound of oil. 1 teaspoon of sugar per pound of oil. 1 teaspoon of salt per pound of oil, all to be added after cook. Or you can add 1 teaspoon per pound of oil of sodium lactate to water. Add before lye. Okay, so these are the kind of notes that you will add to Soapy so that when you go back to make your bar, you don't have to guess. Because trust me, the more variety you make, the more difficult it'll be to recall that from your mental Rolodex. So let's go down, or you can do it there. I'm sorry. You can either place you can put it. All right. And then we're going to save recipe. Okay. There we go. So there's our recipe there and where we saved it. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to go through and again, print this off. You can write it if you want. I have to write it so that I can see. So you have a print preview. You can favorite it so that it's easy for you to find. Let's do that. Okay. And then I'm going to make a copy. And I'm going to make a copy because I'm going to just kind of tweak it a little bit. So as I stated, I don't teach or recommend making a soap with a 0% superfat unless you are making a bar with this 0% superfat as a dish bar or something like that. It cooks better, in my opinion, with at least 2%. But I want a total of 7%, and I want to be able to add oils after the cook or butters after the cook that are completely untouched by the saponification process. I want to add the most expensive butter on the face of the earth, and the last thing that I want it to do is go through the chemical process of saponification. That is the beauty of hot process soap making in a nutshell. This is my cake. I've added everything that I needed to the batter. I may have added a couple extra. My super fat at 2% is like chocolate chips in the chocolate chip batter, but I want chocolate frosting on this cake. Those are my after cook super fats. This is the frosting, and this is how I know how much frosting that I am going to add at the end. Got it? All right. So everything remains the same for the most part. Box one remains the same. Box two remains the same because ideally I'm making the identical soap. Box three stays the same. Box four is where we change. I've already got 2%. I want 7. So I'm going to change this number here to 5 and I'm going to add super fat after cook, right? So you see there where that box pops up, this will be calculated with 0% superfat. That's fine because I want 5%. I want to know what that 5% is or that additional amount. And you can go up higher if you want. That's not a problem. I've got my oil weight, it's going to stay the exact same. My additives are going to stay the same. All of this is going to go untouched. What I want, my recipe, my oils will stay the same. What I want to know is stays the same, stays the same. Here's the difference. This is the number that I want from this recipe. You notice before it said super fat, 2%. Here, it gives me an exact amount of super fat to measure out. If I'm using shea butter, if I'm using grapeseed oil, if I'm using whatever I want to use, and this is where you get to be creative. Whatever super fat you are going to use after the cook for these oils that we have listed above, right? Your Crisco, your coconut oil, your castor oil, your olive oil. For those specific ingredients, my super fat amount is going to be 25 grams. That is it. That is all that I want from this recipe. Okay. So now I don't need, you can save it, right? Be sure that you make a note. Do not use this version. Use version 1. Make sure you make yourself a note so that you don't accidentally use this version. Okay, your measurements are going to be slightly different with the amount of water and oils because you want the super fat out after the cook. So that little bit of oil that should be unsaponified is not, there'll be slight differences in the calculations. So that's why you want to use the first one that we have. Okay. And then we'll go copy recipe. And then we are going to, so there's the recipe that we just did, right? Perfect. So now I want to go up top here. I want to go to my profile. I want to go over here to the side to my recipes. There's Superfat 2. That's not the one that I want. I want to use Superfat in Cook. I want to open this recipe. See all of my information. And then I am going to add to it recipe details. Add 25 grams of superfat after cook. That way, what I know is that when I go to make this soap, every time I go to it, I'm going to then have a note to remember that I need to add that 25 grams. Let's put it up here. Oh, Lord. What is that? I don't want this. Alrighty. Well, we got a smiley face or some kind of face as well. Let's go back. I'm sorry, I'm going to hit edit. My computer is lagging right now, so I apologize. But as a recap, remember, we're going to use that first recipe because we want the 2%. We also need to go out, just snatch out from that second recipe the number of superfat that we're going to use in that first recipe, because we're going to measure that out, sit it to the side, and add it to the cook. So let's go down here. There we go. After cook superfat amount, we're just going to add this here, 25 grams, right? I think we can bold it and also underline it, right? And maybe even change the color so that we don't forget to add that after the cook. A soap with 2% superfat is going to be fine. A soap with a 7% superfat, that 5% of it has not been touched by the saponification process, is going to be way better. And that is it. That is how we get our recipe that we are going to use for our first batch of hot process soap. If you have a cold process recipe, you can use it, right? So you make cold process soap already. You've already determined what your signature recipe is going to be. You can definitely use that. Some things that I would do different. First, again, I would run it through Soapy doing the exact same process that we went through. After that, I would also decide what I'm going to say that I would also decide what ingredients in this soap do I not want to have touched. You don't have to put your colorant. So one of the things you can do with your super fat is you can mix it. So you can leave that expensive butter and you can use a couple grams of grapeseed oil to mix your activated charcoal or your moringa or whatever type of colorant you're going to use. None of that gets added, has to be, you can, but none of that has to be added to the front of the cook. Your aloe vera gel, if you're going to add some aloe vera gel, you can add that after the cook. All of those things, but again, and you don't always have to, unless you're doing a huge amount, you don't always have to measure that amount of water out, like say with aloe gel. You're not going to put so much in it that it's going to change the composition enough that you need to take it out of your water that you're making. So, what you can do then is use some liquid oils to mix your colors, etc. Count that off of your super fat, 2 grams off of that 25. You can do a mix of multiple butters and oils. The important thing is that you stay at 25 grams. And that's it. That is soapy. I hope that was clear. You also have written instructions in the workbook. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me at Camille, Camille, at hazelsoapery.com with your questions, or contact me through direct messaging as well. But I'm here for you if you have any questions. If there was anything that you need me to clarify, please reach out to me and I'd be happy to help. All right, so let's move on to the next part of soap making. We're almost there, guys. Hang tight. Thanks for joining.